Ooh. Aphex Twin. That's how you fucking start a review. Thanks everyone. Fuck off. Thanks everyone who told me to close my door, by the way. I fixed it. I closed the door. So yeah, anyway, let's talk about Aphex Twin. You know the guy, Richard D. James? You know the guy. Fucking Cyro guy, you know? He is a very pivotal, seminal, important artist for the genre of electronic music. I absolutely love this album to fucking death. And yeah, he has a new EP out. It's 5 tracks. It's called Collapse under Warp Records, of course. And yeah, in regards to where this EP, I think, stands in the grand scheme of Aphex Twin's discography, outside of the occasional kind of footwork and juke influence on this EP. Ultimately, I don't really think there's that much about this EP that really makes it stand out, in my opinion, in regards to just the grander scheme of things in Richard D. James's catalog. You know, I think this is him kind of staying in his comfort zone a little bit. He's kind of retreading familiar territory on this thing. You know, occasionally he'll throw in some pretty frantic drum programming and shit like that. It gets pretty unorthodox at points, sure, but this is one of the flatter and more uninteresting releases, for me at least, in his catalog. The opening track, T69 Collapse, the percussion on this thing, it's often throughout this entire EP, the percussion's very limp, very dull, very not very like harsh or anything like that, which is good because there is so much of it. You know, it's a very technical and speedy EP. There are layers upon layers of just oddball analog synths and fucking so much percussion is firing off at once on this EP at points. It's kind of overwhelming, but not in like an oppressively loud way or anything like that. It's well mixed and everything. There is a lingering sort of subtle eeriness to it at points on this EP too, especially on the track First 44. This track does offer some pretty interesting ideas with its kind of off-killer 808 groove in the first few minutes and the rapid-fire fucking claps on this thing. There are these violent, distorted kind of shouts that just sort of pierce through really abrasively, just kind of bursting through the kind of thin layers, these clouds of just skittering drums that are just padding out this track to oblivion, and it's a pretty exciting song. This is my personal favorite on the EP. And I love how this track is just sort of pulsating in and out of focus as it progresses with these really ominous kind of underlying bass tones that are just lurking throughout the track. It sounds fantastic. There are these warped, kind of dizzying, relentless hi-hats too that just skitter in and out at points on this thing, and they just kind of dominate the track at points. It's pretty fucking cool. I love how this track kind of smoothly progresses as well into a pretty explosive and chilling finale, which features an onslaught of aggressive vocal samples and some really distorted drums too, a pretty creepy and spacious ending sequence too to leave things off. I thought it was a pretty nuanced track. And it's followed with the song MT1T29R2, fucking Aphex. This is one of the least interesting cuts to me personally. The track does a pretty weak job at building much momentum. It features a few pretty drastic tonal shifts at points, and they often come in quite abruptly too, and they just kind of drown out much of the tone that was being built up until that point. But there are some pretty cool moments, like the drumming at the 2-minute 19-second mark is really fricative and frenetic, and it gets accompanied by some pretty harrowing, cold synth lines that just give it a really eerie atmosphere. It's just annoying how it kind of just all drowns out when it just transitions pretty awkwardly into this kind of bright synth bell passage that isn't nearly as engaging to me. That kind of pops in at various points throughout this particular song. The harps that eventually come in later on, though, are really warm and a nice inviting embrace amongst the kind of mechanical onslaught with the drumming and just being so speedy and technical. The song can get pretty disorienting and exciting, especially in the second half at various points in its runtime, but ultimately it's a bit of an awkward track in my opinion. I noticed this with this fucking EP. On every song, I swear to God, during the second half, there's always a good like stretch, like 30 seconds to a minute, where things drastically pick up in intensity and it gets really insane, and then it just kind of transitions into a softer finish. And I feel like that's how most every track here kind of concludes. It gets a little bit predictable in my opinion. The fourth track, Abundance 10 Edit, is incredibly bouncy. I enjoy how the different layers on this song come together so creatively. I think it's really cool to see him toy around with these really speedy vocal chops and these really eerie synth pads in the background too. It's a nice contrast. It sounds like something that you would hear like on one of the nighttime planets from a Ratchet and Clank game. Some of the drums he uses on this track are actually really fucking vivid. Some really cool timbres on this one across the board from front to back on this track. I just wish the song was structured a little bit more. The pace of the song just wasn't that interesting to me. It just felt like a bit of a safe track. Ultimately, the sound palette, though, is probably the most exciting on this song, on the whole EP, but with this kind of jungly sort of nocturnal feel and everything. But I don't know, the way it was executed and used just felt pretty standard. And I can say the same thing for the final track, pthex, which uses a pretty familiar sound palette, but I think it uses it more effectively as it builds a pretty cold atmosphere. This track is very Cyro-esque, particularly. This whole EP actually kind of feels like a more condensed sort of miniature version of Cyro, with a bit more of a footwork influence, and some of the squelchy synths that are used on this final track feel pretty fucking dated. In fact, that's kind of the case for the whole EP. There are some pretty dated synth choices, but it genuinely does have a pretty sinister atmosphere, this final track. This track just sounds like you're just staring out into some seemingly endless void of just like, or just like miles upon miles of just snow. And you just seemingly just forever. It's just like, whoa. And I think it builds that tone pretty nicely, but the ending of this song was such a fucking cop-out, a really abrupt ending. It just felt pretty inconclusive, just how well it was developing this atmosphere. It didn't really amount to much by the end, and ultimately this EP just didn't really fulfill me too much. I thought it was fine. It just seems like a pretty inessential release for Aphex Twin. Not really push him into any sort of new territory, really, outside of a few kind of footwork influences here and there, but generally the sound palette, the songwriting, the structures on this thing, it's nothing outside of, you know, the norm for him, really. All the high points on this EP you can get on another Aphex Twin release, but to a higher degree. Which is why I've landed on a 6 for this EP. Thank you very much. And yeah, that's everything I have to say on this thing. Thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye!